You know that feeling.
Yeah.
You're out somewhere beautiful, maybe hiking a trail, or maybe just walking along the beach.
Oh, yeah. Trying to soak it all in.
Totally. Just enjoying the peace, right? Sand between your toes, listening to the waves, and then bam, your eye catches something. Something off.
Doesn't belong there.
Exactly. Something bright blue, or maybe white, flapping relentlessly, caught on a branch or tangled in seaweed.
A plastic grocery bag?
Yep, a single plastic bag. Just
Yeah.
there. Kind of ruins the moment, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's jarring.
And let's be honest, it happens all the time. It's not like it's a rare sight anymore.
Unfortunately, no. It's become depressingly common.
We all know plastic pollution is huge. A massive global issue from mountains to oceans.
No doubt about it.
And yeah, governments, communities, they're trying to do something. Putting rules in place, right?
All right.
Plastic bag bans, fees.
We hear about them quite a bit. New policies popping up.
But here's the really big question, the one we want to tackle today. Do these things actually work? Are they making a real difference?
A measurable difference. Or is it more about, feeling like we're doing something?
Exactly. Are they actually reducing the amount of plastic ending up? Well, where it shouldn't be. Well, that's precisely what we're digging into in this deep dive. There's this fantastic, really solid study we found. Groundbreaking, actually.
Came out of the University of Delaware and Columbia University.
Right. And what they did was systematically evaluate the real-world impact of these plastic bag policies.
Specifically on shoreline litter. What's actually washing up on our beaches?
So this deep dive is really for you, our listener. We want to try and cut through all the conflicting info out there.
Move beyond just anecdotes.
Yeah, get straight to the core insights. What does the science actually tell us? Because some of it is pretty surprising.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Here's the mission for today.
Let's do it.
First up, why are these plastic bags such a particular problem anyway? What makes them so bad for the environment?
Gotta understand the why first.
Exactly. Then we'll get into how these researchers actually measured the impact. Their methodology. It's pretty genius.
Yeah, how do you even track that effectively?
We'll cover that. After that, the big reveal. What did they actually find in all that data? The results.
The core findings.
And like I said, some surprises. And finally, we'll talk about what it all means. The bigger picture of plastic pollution and maybe, where we go from here.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here right from the start is the approach the researchers took. Kimberly Oremus and Anna Papp. They really zeroed in on something crucial.
Which was?
Well, instead of just looking at economic models or, say, check out data from stores, how many bags people bought.
Right, which tells you about usage, maybe, but not litter.
Exactly. They went straight for a direct measurement of the actual litter, the stuff found in the environment.
On shorelines.
Precisely. So it's not just about consumption, it's about what actually ends up polluting those ecosystems.
Okay, so that direct observation makes the results much more powerful.
Absolutely. It provides a much more robust, much more actionable metric for policymakers. You're measuring the actual problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, so let's start there then. The main character in our story today. The simple, thin plastic shopping bag.
Seems so harmless.
Right, totally. So light, so convenient. But why are they such a massive environmental headache?
Well, it turns out their best features from a convenience standpoint are actually their worst features for the environment.
How so?
But think about how incredibly light they are. Feather light.
Yeah, designed that way.
Right, which is great for carrying stuff, but terrible once they get loose, even a small gust of wind.
And they're gone.
Exactly, they just blow away. Out of bins, off trucks, even out of your hand on a windy day.
And Kimberly Oremus, one of the study authors, she pointed out there are just so many pathways a bag can take.
Right.
From the store to, well, wherever.
It could be thrown out wrong, it could blow out of a landfill.
Landfills aren't always perfectly contained, are they?
Not always, especially during storms. Or it could just blow out of someone's backyard trash can if it's not secured.
And recycling them is a nightmare too, isn't it? Because they're so flimsy.
Oh, absolutely. They get tangled in the machinery at recycling centers. They cause shutdowns.
So a lot of places just don't even accept them in curbside recycling.
Right, which means really, really low recycling rates compared to, say, plastic bottles.
So where do they end up? Incinerators? Landfills?
A lot of them, yeah. Or worse, just blowing around. And the thing is, they stick around. They're designed to last.
For decades. Centuries.
Potentially. They persist in the environment for a very, very long time. They don't just disappear. They become this long-term, visible and really harmful problem.
And once they do get into the environment, especially rivers, lakes, oceans, the consequences are pretty grim.
Devastating, really, both for individual animals and the whole ecosystem.
The most obvious thing is probably entanglement, right? We've all
Yeah.
seen those awful pictures.
Yeah, heartbreaking images. Sea turtles with bags wrapped around their flippers, seabirds tangled up, unable to fly or feed.
Hinders swimming, hunting,
Yeah.
can lead to injury, starvation,
Or drowning. And they can also eat them, mistaking them for food, like jellyfish.
which blocks their digestion.
Exactly. Leads to a slow, painful death. It's truly awful. But it actually gets worse, in a way, beyond that direct harm.
How?
Because over time, sunlight, waves, general wear and tear, they break these bags down, but not away.
They break down into something else.
Precisely. They fragment into smaller and smaller pieces, microplastics.
Ah, right, these tiny, tiny bits of plastic.
Microscopic eventually. And once they're formed, they are practically impossible to clean up. They're just in the water, in the soil.
And they get into the food chain?
Yep. Starts with the smallest organisms, plankton maybe. They eat the plastic, then small fish eat the plankton.
And it just goes up the chain to bigger fish, marine mammals.
And potentially to us when we eat seafood.
And these microplastics aren't just inert little bits, are they? They can carry toxins.
That's another major concern. They can absorb pollutants from the water and then deliver those toxins inside the organisms that eat them. Plus, the plastic itself can contain harmful chemicals. It can disrupt biological processes at a cellular level.
Wow. So if you connect that to the bigger picture, you can see why plastic bags became such a focus.
Absolutely. It's clear why this specific type of litter got so much global attention. This growing awareness, fueled by science and public campaigns.
That's what led to all those policies. Over 100 countries doing something.
Exactly. Bans, fees,
Yeah.
a global effort trying to tackle this very specific, very pervasive pollutant.
Okay, so that sets the stage. We understand the problem. We know policies are popping up everywhere, from tiny towns to entire countries.
A real patchwork of approaches.
Right, so the massive question remains, does any of it actually work when it comes to cleaning up our shorelines? Does it make a real, tangible difference on the beaches, in the water?
Does it stop those bags from getting there in the first place? That's what the study aimed to find out.
And the story behind how they figured this out is actually pretty cool. It kind of started with an aha moment for Kimberly Oremus.
The lead economist on the team.
Yeah, she learned about volunteers doing beach cleanups in Delaware, her home state.
Okay, lots of community groups do those.
Right, but these volunteers were using an app called Clean Swell, and they were meticulously logging every single piece of trash they picked up. Every bottle cap, every wrapper.
Wow, detailed data collection.
Exactly. And she realized this data wasn't just staying local. It was all being fed into this huge global database run by the Ocean Conservancy.
Ah, the TIDES database. Trash information and data for education and solutions.
That's the one. TIDES. Just picture it for a second. Tens of thousands of volunteers all over the world, year after year.
Dedicated people spending their time cleaning up.
And carefully recording every single item. That's not just numbers, it's this incredibly rich, granular, real-world information source.
A treasure trove, really.
Totally. And when Oremus found out about this database, she had that realization, this huge potential.
To answer big questions.
Exactly. She basically said, hey, we can use this. We can look at the composition of litter. Like, what percentage of the trash collected was plastic bags?
Before and after a policy was put in place in a specific location.
Precisely. And then crucially, compare that to places that didn't have a policy.
The control group idea again.
Right. It's like this giant natural experiment using data collected by volunteers. Pretty smart.
It really is. And the TIDES database is just a phenomenal example of citizen science in action.
Ordinary people contributing to major research.
Absolutely. Allison Schutz from the Ocean Conservancy, she directs their cleanup program. She made a great point about this. She said something like, we always remind volunteers the data they collect is used to make real change.
And this study is proof of that.
Exactly. It shows how individual efforts, when you aggregate them and analyze them rigorously, can actually inform and drive significant policy insights. And the researchers could be really precise with this data. They could see, okay, at this beach before the ban, maybe 5% of the items collected were plastic bags.
And then after the ban.
They could track that percentage. Did it go down? By how much?
And compare it to a similar beach nearby that didn't have a ban.
Exactly. That comparison is key. It lets you isolate the effect of the policy itself, rather than just say, a general trend of people becoming more environmentally conscious everywhere.
Right. Controls for other factors.
Precisely. It allows for much more confident conclusions about whether the policy actually caused the change.
And Anna Papp, the study's lead author, she really hammered home why this specific data, the actual litter collected, was so valuable.
Compared to just sales data.
Yeah. She explained that the plastic collected on shorelines acts as a really good proxy for the total amount of plastic litter in the local marine or aquatic environment.
Okay, so it's a direct window into the pollution problem itself.
Exactly. It's what's actually out there causing harm, not just what's being rung up at the cash register.
And that direct measurement, looking at the actual litter, it adds this crucial empirical layer. Pat pointed out that, a lot of the previous economics literature used checkout data at the store level.
Which we already said has limitations.
Right. That data tells you if people are taking fewer bags from the store. Which is interesting, but it doesn't automatically mean fewer bags are ending up as litter.
Yeah, someone might reuse old bags badly, or bags might come from other sources.
Exactly. There's a gap between point-of-sale behavior and actual environmental leakage. This study bridges that gap by measuring the litter directly.
So it's a much more tangible, ecologically relevant metric.
Absolutely. It gives you that real-world picture of environmental impact. That's a huge contribution to the field.
And the sheer scale here is just mind-boggling, really.
It's enormous.
They analyzed data from tens of thousands of individual shoreline cleanups.
Tens of thousands.
Across hundreds of different local policies, all within the United States.
That's a monumental undertaking, just processing that amount of data.
It really is. Countless hours of volunteer work, years of data, all crunched together.
And the decision to focus just on the U.S. was actually a really clever methodological choice.
Why the U.S. specifically?
Because, unlike some other countries, the U.S. doesn't have a single uniform federal policy on plastic bags. It's all over the place.
So you have states, counties, towns all doing different things.
Exactly, which allowed the researchers to treat the U.S. as this giant natural experiment. They could compare town-level policies versus county-level versus state-level policies.
All within the same broad cultural and economic context.
Precisely. It minimizes a lot of the background noise you'd get comparing, say, a policy in California to one in France. It makes the comparisons much cleaner, much more robust.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Isolates the policy variable better.
Right. Critical for drawing statistically sound conclusions about what works best.
Okay, so we've got the problem, we've got this incredible database, this clever methodology. Now for the juicy part, here's where it gets really interesting.
What did they actually find?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What did all this meticulous analysis of crowdsourced cleanup data actually reveal about whether these plastic bag policies make a difference? All right, let's hit the headlines first, because the main finding is pretty stark and honestly quite encouraging.
Good news.
Definitely. The study found a really consistent and significant drop, a 25% to 47% decrease in plastic bags as a share of all the litter collected on shorelines in places with policies compared to places without them.
Wow, 25 to 47% fewer bags. That's substantial.
It really is. Think about that. In areas with these rules, potentially almost half as many plastic bags are ending up on beaches and riverbanks. That's a difference you can actually see.
That's a tangible impact.
And here's something else really important. This wasn't just a one-time dip. Like, people get enthusiastic right after a policy starts and then slip back into old habits.
It wasn't temporary.
No. The researchers found that this decrease actually grows in magnitude over time. The longer the policy is in place, the bigger the reduction in bag litter becomes.
Okay, that suggests real behavioral change, people adapting over the long haul.
Exactly. Habits forming, and maybe infrastructure adapting too. And crucially, they found no evidence of the rates rebounding. It wasn't like things got better for a year and then went back to how they were.
So it's a lasting effect?
It appears to be, yeah. A sustained, positive change. Or Remus, one of the researchers, she even said she was surprised at how robust the results were.
Because litter pathways are so complex.
Right. Bags can travel really far, come from anywhere. The fact that the signal from the policies was so clear in the data, despite all that complexity, really says something.
It underscores that these policies can interrupt that journey from hand to shoreline. And Anna Papp, the lead author, she mentioned being surprised too, but from a different angle. she was struck by the sheer reach of these policies already.
How many people are affected?
Her analysis showed that roughly 1/3 of Americans are living in an area with some sort of plastic bag policy in place.
1/3. Wow, that's way more than I would have guessed. Over 100 million people.
It's huge. This isn't some niche thing happening in a few coastal towns. It's widespread.
That points to a pretty big shift, doesn't it?
It really does. A significant societal move on single-use plastics. And she also highlighted the variety. They compiled data on over 600 policies just between 2007 and 2023.
600. And they vary a lot.
Immensely. Different types. Bans, fees, hybrid models, different scales, town, county, state. It's a real patchwork quilt of regulations across the country.
Which raises that big question, right? Is this patchwork approach effective enough, or do we need something more uniform, like a national policy?
That's the debate. But this study suggests that even with all this variation, these local and state policies are having a demonstrable positive impact overall.
Okay, that's fascinating. So with over 600 different policies in the mix, did they find any patterns? Like, did all types of policies work equally well, or were some more effective than others?
Now we get into the really nuanced findings. And yes, they absolutely found differences. Very interesting ones.
Like what?
Okay, first, let's talk geographic scale. They found more robust impacts from state-level policies than town-level policies.
State level worked better than town level. Why would that be?
Well, it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? A statewide policy covers a much bigger area, more consistent.
Harder to just drive to the next town to avoid it.
Exactly. Less leakage across borders. Plus, maybe enforcement is more streamlined or public awareness campaigns are broader. It creates a more comprehensive shift over a larger region.
Okay, that makes sense. Broader reach, bigger impact. What else?
Second, and this one might surprise some people, they looked at the policy mechanism. Bans versus fees.
Right. Where one worked better. I think most people assume bans are tougher, maybe more effective.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the data suggested something else. Fees appearing to reduce litter even more than bans.
Fees worked better than bans.
Yeah.
Seriously.
That's what the data indicated. Now, the researchers themselves say, look, more study is needed to understand exactly why. It's complex.
But any theories? Why would a small fee be more effective than an outright ban?
Well, you can speculate based on behavioral economics. A ban is absolute. You adjust, maybe switch to reusable bags, maybe use more paper bags, maybe even buy thicker reusable plastic bags, but still treat them as single use.
Right. People adapt.
But a fee, even just 5 or 10 cents, it's a little nudge every single time you check out.
A constant reminder.
Exactly. That little point of friction. Do you need a bag? It's 10 cents. It might force a more active decision each time. Ugh, do I really need this bag? Did I forget my reusable one again?
So it keeps the behavior change front of mind. Maybe more than a ban you just get used to.
That's one plausible explanation. The fee acts as a continuous behavioral prompt, whereas with a ban, the prompt disappears once you've adapted. Again, more research needed, but it's a fascinating finding. And there was a third really interesting finding related to context.
Okay.
They found that policies were most effective in places where the plastic bag litter problem was more severe to begin with.
So where the problem was worse, the solution worked better.
Kind of, yeah. Which could mean a couple of things. Maybe in places where bags were visibly everywhere, blowing down streets, piled up on beaches, people were just more motivated.
The problem was undeniable.
Yep.
So public buy-in for the policy was higher.
Possibly. Or maybe the impact felt more immediate and rewarding, reinforcing compliance. Alternatively, it could just be statistical. If you start with a ton of bag litter, there's simply more room for a large percentage decrease when a policy comes in.
Right, more low-hanging fruit to pick, so to speak.
Exactly. It highlights that the starting conditions, the local context, really matters in how effective a policy appears to be.
Wow. Those are some seriously eye-opening findings, especially the fees versus bans thing. That challenges a lot of common assumptions.
It really does. Shows the importance of looking at the actual data.
Absolutely. But, with any good deep dive, there's always another layer, right? A crucial nuance that puts the headlines into perspective.
Always. The bigger picture context.
Exactly. So what does this all mean when we zoom out and look at the whole massive issue of global plastic pollution? Is this the solution or just part of it?
Right. And this is probably the most critical piece of nuance to come out of the study. It's frankly quite sobering.
Okay, lay it on us.
Despite the clear success of these policies in reducing the percentage of plastic bags found in cleanups where the policies exist.
The 25-47% reduction we just talked about.
Exactly. Despite that success, the researchers also observed that the overall percentage of plastic bags as a share of all litter items collected is actually increasing over time.
Right, increasing.
Yeah.
Even in places with the policies.
Increasing in both types of places, those with policies and those without.
How can that be if the policies are reducing them?
It's increasing less in the places with policies. Let me clarify that because it's key.
Please do.
Think of it like this. The tide of all plastic litter might be rising everywhere. But in places with bag policies, the specific contribution of plastic bags to that rising tide is significantly lower than it would be otherwise. The policies are working against the current for bags, but the overall current of plastic pollution might still be getting stronger.
Okay, so the policies are working for bags specifically, but bags overall are still becoming a slightly larger fraction of total litter compared to, say, 10 years ago. Just less so where there are policies.
Precisely. Kimberly Oremus put it very directly. She said, "We're still getting more plastic bags on shorelines as a percentage of all the cleanup items over time. It's not eliminating the problem, it's just making it grow more slowly."
Okay, that really changes the perspective. Slowing the growth, not reversing it overall.
Exactly. It underscores the sheer scale of the plastic pollution challenge we face globally. It's like, imagine you're bailing water out of a boat with a really effective bucket. You're making progress with the bucket, but the leak in the boat is getting slightly worse overall. Your bucket is helping tremendously, but it hasn't stopped the leak entirely.
That is a really, really critical distinction for us all to understand. So these policies are about mitigation, not elimination.
That's the perfect word, mitigation.
They are significantly slowing down how quickly plastic bag litter accumulates. Which is hugely important, don't get me wrong. It proves they're an effective tool.
An essential tool.
But they aren't a silver bullet. They don't make the whole plastic pollution problem just vanish. They're buying us time, reducing harm in a specific area.
Absolutely. And it forces us to ask that bigger question.
Yeah.
Why is the overall problem still growing?
Right. What else is contributing to this rising tide of plastic?
Well, the study points towards the fact that plastic pollution is growing in general. This isn't just about bags, it's about the exponential increase in plastic production and consumption across the board.
Packaging, textiles, construction, electronics. It's everywhere.
It really is. So while these bag policies are demonstrably effective for bags, they can only mitigate some of its impacts. They tackle one slice, albeit a very visible slice, of a much, much larger, more complex global issue.
So they're a necessary piece, but not the whole puzzle.
Exactly. They have to be seen as part of a much broader strategy. And understanding this nuance is so important for setting realistic expectations for the public, for policymakers.
Yeah, we can celebrate the success of bag policies, but we can't declare victory on plastic pollution because of them.
Right. It's great news that they work locally and proportionally. But the global trend is still heading in the wrong direction overall. It pushes us to think more critically.
Why is overall plastic use still increasing so much? What are the fundamental drivers?
It suggests the problem is deeply systemic. It's tied into our economic models, our consumption habits, global supply chains.
So we need solutions that go beyond just managing one type of end-of-life product.
Yeah.
We need upstream solutions too.
That's strongly implied. While targeted policies like bag regulations are valuable and work, the sheer scale suggests we need to tackle production, consumption, waste infrastructure, the whole system. These policies help us manage the symptoms effectively in one area, but the underlying condition still requires broader treatment.
Okay, that context is incredibly powerful. It really reframes the success story into one of effective mitigation within a larger ongoing challenge. So knowing this, knowing both the successes and this crucial nuance, what does this study ultimately tell us about how we should move forward? What are the big takeaways for the future? Well, first off, for anyone involved in making policy, whether it's city council, state legislature, wherever this study is basically gold, it provides really strong, large-scale scientific proof that these plastic bag policies do work. They do limit litter on shorelines. That's not just a guess anymore, it's backed by extensive data.
Takes it out of the realm of anecdote.
Exactly. It validates the efforts of places that have already put these policies in place. It says, hey, what you did is actually making a measurable difference.
Which must be encouraging for them.
Totally. And it gives a really solid evidence-based argument for other places that are still debating whether to implement similar rules. It provides cover, data justification.
Removes some of the uncertainty. And the scale of the study itself is just so significant for the field. As Anna Papp stressed, ours is the first large-scale study to use hundreds of policies and tens of thousands of cleanups to look at their effects.
Right, not just one city or one small region.
Exactly. This comprehensive approach, using this massive real-world data set, it sets a new standard, really. It provides a level of validation that's hard to argue with.
Which is crucial when you're talking about environmental regulations that can sometimes be controversial.
Absolutely. Having robust, data-driven evidence like this helps move those conversations forward based on facts, not just opinions or economic forecasts that might miss the environmental reality. And connecting back to that nuance we discussed, the fact that these policies work but don't solve the whole problem, that actually points towards the next steps.
How so?
Well, because the study shows both the effectiveness and the limitations of targeting just one item, it implicitly makes a powerful case for a more comprehensive approach to plastic pollution overall.
Meaning, bag policies are great, but we need more.
Exactly. They're a vital first step, maybe low-hanging fruit in some ways, but if the overall tide is still rising, we clearly need to do more.
Like what kind of things? Thinking upstream.
Precisely. Things like designing products differently from the start for easier recycling, for reuse, using alternative materials, thinking about extended producer responsibility, making manufacturers more accountable for what happens to their products at the end of life.
So they have an incentive to design better.
Right. And huge investments needed in waste management infrastructure globally. Better collection, better sorting, better recycling facilities, especially in developing nations where leakage into the environment is often highest.
So the study validates the specific tool, bag policies, but also highlights the need for a much bigger toolbox.
That's a perfect way to put it. It shows what works on one front, while reminding us the war against plastic pollution needs to be fought on many fronts simultaneously.
And this whole conversation, these findings, they land at a really critical moment globally, don't they?
Absolutely. Extremely timely.
Because the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, they've announced the next big round of negotiations for an international plastic treaty.
Scheduled for August 2025. This is a huge deal, aiming for a legally binding global agreement to tackle plastic pollution.
An unprecedented effort, really.
And this is where a study like Oremus and PAPS becomes incredibly relevant on that global stage. This is that if we connect this to the bigger picture moment.
How does it feed into those treaty negotiations?
Their research highlights the opportunity for those talks. It provides concrete, data-driven proof that specific policy interventions can be effective at reducing plastic litter.
It shows what works, based on real-world evidence.
Exactly. It gives negotiators tangible examples of policy mechanisms like fees, maybe state-level implementation, that have demonstrated success on a large scale, at least regionally.
So it can inform the strategies they discuss for global action.
Precisely. It helps move the discussion from just setting broad goals to figuring out how to actually achieve them using policy tools that have a proven track record. It empowers them to integrate effective, evidence-based measures into a potential global treaty.
So understanding these nuances, the success, the limitations, the mitigation aspect, it's vital for everything from local decisions to these huge global negotiations.
It really is. It's key to designing effective action at every single level. Hashtag TACTAC outro.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main takeaways from our deep dive today into this really important study on plastic bag policies.
Let's nail it down.
The big headline: these policies do work. They make a real measurable difference, cutting plastic bag litter on shorelines by a significant chunk, somewhere between 25% and 47%.
Which is substantial.
Definitely. And we learned they get more effective over time. State-level policies seem to pack a bigger punch than town-level ones. And maybe counterintuitively, fees might actually edge out bans in terms of reducing litter.
Some really actionable insights there for policymakers, but then there's that crucial nuance, the big but.
Right. The essential takeaway, really.
While these policies are clearly working locally and relatively doing their job on bags where they're implemented, the overall problem of plastic pollution, the bigger tide, is still rising globally.
So they're mitigating, not eliminating, slowing the growth of bag litter, which is vital, but not solving the entire plastic crisis on their own.
Exactly. They are a proven essential tool, but just one tool in what needs to be a much larger, more comprehensive strategy to tackle plastic pollution systemically.
So this deep dive, it really shows us two things, doesn't it? First, the real power of specific targeted policies. Proof that well-designed actions can lead to significant positive change in the environment.
validation that action matters.
But second, and maybe even more critically, it's a stark reminder of the sheer immense scale of the broader challenge, the systemic nature of plastic pollution.
We can't just focus on one item and think the job is done.
Right. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. As you go about your day, maybe you're thinking about your own choices, maybe you're observing policies in your own community. How does this understanding, this distinction between mitigation and elimination, shape your perspective?
How does it change how you think about solving these huge global environmental problems?
Yeah, if bad policies work but aren't enough on their own, what other everyday items might need similar attention? And maybe more profoundly, what are those deeper systemic changes in how we design products, how we consume, how we manage waste globally that are truly needed to not just slow the flow of plastic pollution, but to actually start turning the tide?